All right, can everybody see in here? Except for Amanda. We haven't found Amanda yet. Okay. So fantastic, thank you. So we stopped here on chapter 1, okay, with population in the Americas. Who is surprised by the population of in the Americas? Yeah? All the people, yes. In the Americas, before contact. Are those numbers surprising to you? How about you in Valdez?
Say that again, I was a little puzzled.
I said, how many people were surprised about the numbers in the population pre-contact?
How many were surprised? Looks like just 0.
I wasn't really expecting anything.
Me either.
I'm not really surprised considering there's no birth control.
Okay. All right. But life was hard, wasn't it? I mean, think about it. There was no Safeway. Right, Savannah?
How do they estimate the numbers?
Great question. They've done mitochondrial DNA. They've done testing of the different populations. They have done estimates by looking at some of the graves that they have found. They also look at how the terrain was changed. Okay, and excavations in certain sites have shown areas like 20 miles of city. Okay, and to have 20 miles of city, you have a lot of people, right? So they're able to estimate that based on today's figures.
The lady that helps her get on, the teacher typically gets her on, and she had to leave, so she's going to ask Taylor if Taylor can help her get on. And if not, she doesn't know how to get on herself. So the teacher's up to school.
Oh, okay.
She's going to call me and let me know whether or not Taylor can help her.
Okay. It should be for PICSIP. It should be as long as you pull that screen up, you should just be able to click it in.
Okay. She's going to call me if she can't get on.
Okay.
I'll tell her that.
Thank you. All right. So kinship, nuclear and extended families. Who here has an extended family? Right. Everyone. Right. Thank you, Valdez. And I'm assuming that Robin is raising her hand too. And I know Star has an extended family. Because I know much of it. Okay, so what's the difference between the extended and the nuclear family?
The nuclear family is made up of the husband, wife, children, like their biological children. The extended family is like your parents' relatives, or like your aunts, your uncles, stuff like that.
Right. Okay.
Cousins.
Exactly. So we see this in chapter 1 in the native populations, correct? Okay. We see this in chapter 2 in which populations? Where extended families are extremely important. Exactly. Right? So extended families, this isn't a new system. All right? But it's a really important system, isn't it? Because this is how people are developing these huge cities. I mean, Chaco Canyon. I mean, check it out. Thousands of people are living in these different places. Okay? You look at the aristocracy in Europe when we get to chapter 2. The aristocracy in Europe, are they related? Yes, they are. What was one of the reasons they think that Egypt fell? Exactly. I can't hear you. And the other students can't hear me. Can you repeat that?
Inbreeding.
Exactly. Okay. So the extended family, the nuclear family, they were all marrying each other. All right. But the family especially in aristocracy, they did not want to expand outside of certain families. They wouldn't, and they couldn't. Right? So spiritual and social values, they changed a little bit. Another thing to note about extended families in a lot of the native cultures is that it's a matrilineal society. All right? Star, can you tell me a little bit about matrilineal kinship?
Well, they're pushing down quite a few.
So I'm still on a conference, but
Sorry.
it's okay. I turned them down. I'm listening to two things at once. But yeah, so it's when the women of the tribes and the families are the most of in charge, and then but the matrilineal means that they're clans and the fortunes and things run through the mother's side of the family instead of the man's side of the family, the father's side.
Yes.
So I would get a clan name for my mother, and so would some of these other matrilineals.
Yes. Thank you. Okay. And then you look at Europe, and it is patrilineal, right? It all comes down through the father. So, two different systems. So what happens when you have two completely different systems that meet? Trade or war, Savannah says. Anything else?
Misunderstandings with people not knowing if they have a non-matrilineal, whatever the word is, if they're not understanding that the women are more in charge than the men. Exactly. When another group comes in where the men are in charge.
Exactly. It causes a lot of different tensions, a lot of misunderstanding, and then what happens? The war, the tensions, the issues. Yes, because two cultures, especially if you don't speak the other language, can often have that problem. Now, was there war in the Americas before contact? Yep, there sure was. Was there war in the Americas after contact? Yep, there sure was. Okay, so the spiritual values, so the earth as a spiritual power, cooperation and consensus and reciprocity. All right, we covered a little bit about reciprocity last time, correct? Yeah. And what is it again?
It's where you work together.
Okay, you work together, trading of gifts. Yes.
Like
a mutual
trading or
agreement.
Something like that.
Okay, agreement, control, right, and this equilibrium of power, right? I give you something, you give me something back, and it brings us to more of an equal status. Now, reciprocity on the eve of contact was one of the major social values. After contact, it was still a major social value, but again, when you have a clash in values, you often have tension and issues, okay, which is what we're going to see. But the cooperation, the consensus, look at the Yupik. Most of the things that they do are all by consensus in northern villages. All right? I mean, that's just the way they settle their issues. That's the way they determine solutions. All right, any questions? No? Okay. Moving right along then to chapter 2. All right. So, oh, I'm sorry, we forgot the quote today. Let's start with the quote here. All right, who wants to read the quote today?
I will.
Okay.
Leave no authority existing not responsible to the people. That's all I can see.
By Thomas Jefferson. Thank you. Yes. Leave no authority existing not responsible to the people. Why would I put that in chapter 2? What was going on in chapter 2?
Mayhem.
Mayhem. In some cases, yes, mayhem. What else?
People were revolting in Europe.
Ah, people started revolting in Europe. Okay.
And they like formed pretty kind of the first state in Virginia.
Aha, the colony in Virginia, yes. All right,
Yep.
Valdez, what else do you have to say?
Anyone? Going on to chapter 2.
Correct.
Not much you could really add to what you've already had been told.
Okay. All right. Thomas Jefferson was from where? Anybody? Virginia. Yes, thank you. Okay, so Thomas Jefferson benefited from these different groups, right? Okay. Today's people. Today we benefit from these groups in some ways, yes? Okay. Now, were there big losers in some of this? Okay, who? When colonists come in, who loses? The
people already there.
The people who were already there, yes. Okay? Because, right. So here it was the Native Americans, yes. But in other regions, in India, in Burma, in Indonesia, in any of these other regions where colonies were created, generally, the people who lived there,
the native people of the land.
Right, they didn't benefit as much as the colonists. Can we all agree on that? Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. All right, moving on to chapter 2. Okay, and you see, I like maps. Can you tell? Okay, discovery of America. What is discovery? Find something to them that was new. Thank you for that caveat. Because was it new to the people who were living here? Amanda, have you joined us?
No, she's still not showing up on the list.
Okay. Let me see if I can come.
Said something.
Thank you very much. Okay, bye. Okay, so it wasn't new. North America and South America were not new, correct? When the colonists came, what did they think though? Did they think it was new? They did, right? And they claimed it. They said, "Hey, this is for my king, and this is for my queen." All right. So, what discoveries were made? Well, when did Columbus come? 1492, thank you. And when did the Vikings come? Valdez.
The Vikings came at least 500 years before.
Yeah, they came about 900. Okay? They came about 900. And nobody can, we don't have definite dates, but we do have evidence, there is evidence that they were here a lot longer, about 500 years longer than, or before Columbus. All right.
They didn't like it, so they left it.
They didn't like it. Well, I don't know if it was that they didn't like it, or if the other people who were here didn't like them liking it. Right?
Too much resistance. I'm out.
Yeah. Okay. So when this happened, there was an intertwining of Europe, Africa, South America, and North America, right? And what is that called? Not quite. Yes, you are. What was it called where things were shared from each continent to the other? Valdez, do you have any stabs at it?
Is it trading?
Well, yes, it's trading, but there is a term for it that they came up with, and it's called the Columbian Exchange.
That's what it is.
Right. Okay? So it was a huge, it heavily impacted and completely impacted north, south. It impacted the globe. Okay? So there was trading back and forth. There was food going one way. There was food going the other way. There were people, right? Both directions. There were animals. There were plants. There was not much that didn't get traded back and forth in the Columbian Exchange. All right? And this is all within a couple hundred years that these things started going back and forth. All right? Now, when you think of Mediterranean cooking, it includes tomatoes, right? Tomatoes are huge in Italy. Where'd they come from? The Americas. Yes, the Americas. Sweet potatoes came from the Americas. Corn or maize came from the Americas. Right? Pigs were not indigenous to America. They came over. Rats came over. Weeds, along with germs. Okay? Now, one of the things that we'll see is this dramatic decrease in the population because of germs. So they bring in influenza, they bring in smallpox. Mostly it was just that that people had never been exposed to it. In Europe, they had been exposed to it for a long time. Not here. Okay? There were things that went back and forth. Syphilis came from the Americas, went back to Europe. Just an amazing amount of trading back and forth, intentional and unintentional. Okay? But that's what is so important about the Columbian Exchange, is that it changed everything. There isn't anything that it didn't change. All right? All right.
Katrina, also they were talking about the species, or some of the species of plants that they brought over were invasive to the plants already growing here.
Exactly. They brought over some weeds that just took over in the fields and that. And the swine, the pigs, would go and they'd destroy all the corn crops. So nobody had any food, because corn was their major source of food. All right? DeSoto, when he went traveling all through the United States, it was amazing. And the horses that came in, okay, because they didn't fence their pigs or their animals. Good point, Star. Thank you. Okay, so we have a primary source here, black and white engraving of Hernando Cortez's men encountering the Aztecs at the Smoking Mountain in Mexico. All right, this is again from the American Philosophical Society. Fantastic collections that they have. All right, but Cortez was here looking for Indian slaves and gold. Okay, you come for gold, you need slaves to mine the gold for you. Right? So Cortez in 1519 came with 600 troops to the Mexican coast. And then he was stunned by Tenochtitlan's expanse and wealth. All right? And what did he do? He raided it, he took it over. Yes. Okay? He conquered it. And after that, and during that, smallpox was here. It just devastated the Aztecs. And so this is where you have the quote in the book where they talk about walking over dead bodies because whole villages would die. Right? And it's really hard to wrap your mind around that, right? I mean, how can you think of an entire village dying? Like nobody left. But look at the epidemic of AIDS in Africa today. There are whole populations dying in Africa. Generally not the entire village, but like an entire grouping of people in the demographics, like between ages 18 and 35. Okay? They're just gone. There's nobody, there's no one that age. Okay? And that's an estimate of the ages, but there are huge gaps of people that are just gone because of germs. All right, so location of selected native peoples. We looked at this before, right? 562 federally recognized tribes in the United States. This number has changed. Okay? 229 of them are in Alaska. That's a lot of people. Yes? Okay. So, how important is Native history in the history of the United States? Valdez, what do you think?
Really important.
Okay. Really important. Valdez classroom, what do you say?
Amanda just got on.
Fantastic. Amanda, welcome. I'm glad you can see that, Robin, because I don't get that. Yes! Hello, Amanda.
Okay.
Welcome, Amanda.
Hi.
Okay. I need to talk to you right after class, and we can straighten this out, okay?
Yeah, thank you.
You bet. Okay, so Valdez, Amanda, we're on chapter 2, slide number 4.
Okay.
Valdez classroom. How significant are natives to the history of the United States?
First, I'd have to say more important than bringing the gun from China.
Well, in a sense, yes, I can see that in a sense. Absolutely. You can't teach U.S. history without teaching about natives. And let me tell you this story, which I was shocked about. And maybe I already told you, but when I was in Philadelphia taking the National Endowment for the Humanities program, right, chosen, 25 of us were chosen from the United States to attend this program. And one of the women who was running the program had just finished her PhD. She had just defended her dissertation. And her dissertation was on the Shawnees. I said, really? So what did you learn? Well, I I've read this and I did this and this is what I came up with. I'm like, oh. And I said, so, how many elders were you able to talk to? Anybody have a guess?
Zero.
Exactly, 0. Okay? So there's scholarship out there. I looked at her and I was stunned. I mean, honestly, I actually couldn't believe that. I said, I would be run out of town if that were, 1, I wouldn't do it. And 2, I'd be completely run out of town. Because when you are talking about a culture and you're talking about a people and you only use scholarship that's written in no oral tradition, in an oral tradition people, how accurate can that be? Right? Okay? And yeah, honestly, we spent 2 days, 1 day or 2 days, maybe 1.5 days, talking about Native people. It was the very first time that some of the other history professors have ever heard or learned about Native people. And they were history professors. I'm thinking, man, I'm glad we live in Alaska and this doesn't happen there. All right?
Yeah, that's pretty sad.
That's pretty sad. It's really, really hard, isn't it? But then you think about it and you go, okay, well, how many people in Rome have I not talked to when I teach the history of Rome? Okay? Not very many. However, this woman had just attended a conference, a Shawnee, and there were Shawnees there, and I asked her if she had also spoken with them, and she's like, no, I didn't know how well received I would be. I'm like, really? I wonder why. So that's just, you can't separate any of the cultures that we have in the United States from U.S. history. You just can't. All right? That's my long-winded explanation. Okay, so here we have another map, yay, of Europe, Africa, and southwestern Asia in 1500. Okay? After contact, right? So you see the Portuguese voyages, you see the ones before and after, you see English voyages, you see all of these large and small nations who are now exploring. One of the reasons they were exploring is because they had huge populations. Huh, really? We had huge populations here too, didn't we? So why weren't we exploring? We, the North and South America. Why weren't we exploring?
Because we weren't as far advanced technology-wise.
Okay, difference in technology. Someone else?
We didn't care about what else was out there.
Maybe didn't care so much about what was out there? Okay.
Were they satisfied with like North America since they had pretty good crop areas, good land, good farming land that was explored already?
Okay. Yes, and in some cases they had enough territory already, right? They didn't need to expand the territory. Is that what you're saying? There were some areas that didn't have enough water, okay? You see, like Cahokia, they thought the drought, and then people dispersed. But there was room to disperse, wasn't there? Because there were several 100,000 people there. Okay, so that's some. The technology is really where we get down to it. The shipbuilding, not saying that there wasn't technology here, it was just different, okay? You also had the aristocracy who was always looking to gain more money. And they went into joint ventures, right? And stock companies. And so people were making money. And so merchants were finally being talked to, because the aristocracy previously would not even discuss anything with a merchant because they were too low class, right? Does everybody know that? Aristocracy never used to talk to the merchants. They were a lower class, and if you were a true aristocracy, you did not engage in merchandising or the merchant class. Okay. However, King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella changed that, didn't they? Okay. And Prince, what's his name, from Portugal, the Wandering Prince, right? They changed that, where they actually got engaged and supported these different trips. All right, so the wealthy merchants started financing the aristocracy. They started financing the rulers' excursions, and they were in it to make money. Everybody was in it to make money, because then they could expand their territory, right? They could pay to expand their territory. Okay. Also, with the Western European population doubling, you have this shift in the wealth and power. You know, we should probably close that door so we don't disturb anyone else. Thank you, Savannah. All right, so does that make sense? Okay, so next slide. You have West African empires and then this European culture and society. So these West African empires, some of them are enormous, aren't they? I mean, look at the Congo, right? Mali, you had phenomenal resources and hierarchy in some of these different societies. Now you can see where the Europeans have come down and they just keep creeping down the shores, right? They keep finding different things, different resources. So which coast do you have? You have the Gold Coast, you have the Ivory Coast, you have the Slave Coast. Okay? How do you think they all got their names? Amanda, any idea?
Is it the slave trade?
Right, the Slave Coast was where there was there were numerous slave trading facilities, right? Gold Coast.
Then the Gold Coast is because there was gold.
Exactly.
Ivory Coast because there was ivory.
Exactly. Right. Okay. So there were Ghana and Mali and Songhai in the Sudan. So those were the wealthiest in the north. Okay. And the chiefdoms were in the south, like the Congo. The Congo was the most wealthy in the south. But in Mali, Timbuktu, has anybody heard of Timbuktu? Right. All right. Going down to Timbuktu. But Timbuktu, even though it was in Mali, it had one of the best universities in the world. It was probably, arguably, the best university in the world at the time. Okay? In Africa. So you get to it, and then you see the difference in the slave trade, and you see the difference in the shift in the type of slaves and the attitude toward the slaves and the people of Africa. And so how do you reconcile those two? Any idea? Or do you?
People just eventually accepted the attitude that was being changed.
People accepted the attitude of change? Okay. Any other thoughts?
They tried to make it okay by saying it was religion.
Ah, they use religion. Okay. A common theme that we'll see continue again and again, or emerge again and again, where things are done in the name of religion, right? Okay. Yes, there were a multitude of different reasons, okay? But in Mali, there was a heavy slave trade. In many of these areas, there was slave trade. The slave trade had generally been you know, if you conquer this people or if you encompass those people, you might gain some slaves, but slaves weren't lifetime, and they were treated, generally they were treated well enough that when they were done with their labor, they could go on and do something else, right? That's a sure, Katrina. All right. So the cohesiveness of the kinship groups really kept people together, especially during the slave trade. So that extended family, this is where the extended family, it's really, really important. All right? Because when you are sold off, you're able to still have some sort of connection to someone or some group, right, you can identify with. Who here has ever moved or lived somewhere else where you knew no one? Couple people?
I have.
Yeah, okay.
I have.
So, is it easier if you at least know someone when you move in?
For like the first time that you move somewhere, it's nice to have at least one person that you know. But I mean, after you do it a lot of times, you get used to it.
Right. Right. Okay.
It also depends on what that person's status in that society is.
And it depends on the status of in the society. Yes. Okay. So if you're coming in with at the top of a company, okay, you may not know anyone per se. Actually, you're going to know somebody. So bad example. If you're coming in and you have a higher status, you're going to be looked up upon and people are going to want to talk to you. But if you're coming in as a slave, people aren't necessarily going to want to talk to you, okay, except for the other slaves. All right, so even if there weren't blood relations, what became common is slaves would group together and become friends and consider themselves family, okay? Consider themselves extended family. All right. In all of these cultures, marriage was a contract and it was a way to form alliances in many respects. Okay? So, in Europe and even in the Americas, not so much in the Americas, it was starting to change, but women were chattel in Europe, meaning they were property. Okay? It was different in some of the different cultures, but it's a striking difference from a matrilineal society, right, where women were important, as opposed to in Europe, where women were not nearly as important. Okay. Now in Africa, there were a lot of farmers. Religion was pervasive in Africa, but it wasn't the Christian religion most times. It was worshiping different things, and nature was spiritual, right? Witchcraft was also really important in Africa. Witchcraft today is still important in Africa. It's still very prevalent. And monotheism was a radical break in African thought. Okay, Akhenaten was run out of town in Egypt because he was worshiping just one god, right? Remember, you all know Akhenaten? No? Okay. He was a short-lived ruler in Egypt, and he worshipped one god, so he got rid of all the other gods, which didn't make Egyptians very happy, and so they overthrew him, right? Which was not uncommon in Egypt's history, all right? But in the European culture, the 15th century was the height of the Renaissance. And the Renaissance, you had this new scholarship, and they were talking about new philosophy and new religion, somewhat. Art, you know. Has anyone been to Florence or the Vatican? Valdez, how about you? No? Okay. Here, I know one of you has. The Renaissance, it was a rediscovery, actually, of ancient Greek and Roman texts, okay? And so they were rediscovering the philosophy, and they were like, wow, isn't this cool? And so it started this whole new thought process of expanding scholarship and looking at the world in a different light. And this beautiful artwork came from it. You had artists who were supported by wealthy merchants, mainly merchants, and some royalty, but they were expanding that. And so with this, you have this artistic achievement, but you also have political and economic tensions because you're changing, okay? And people may say change is good. People may say you like change, but who likes change? Is it very hard? Robin, how about you?
I like change. That's why I've moved a lot.
Okay.
I've lived in 9 states, so.
There you go. Okay. And Morgan, how about you? Do you like change?
No.
Okay. So we have one resounding yes, and we have one resounding no. Okay? A lot of people are in between. Change can be exciting, but it can really, really, really be hard. All right? Which can lead, if you're changing society doesn't always change very quickly, and it doesn't change very easily, right? But this rebirth during the Renaissance was changing the European culture and society so much that they were looking elsewhere now. They were expanding beyond their own borders and expanding beyond the European border with, France and Germany and looking for different places to expand. 75% of the people in Europe at the time were peasants. Peasants, if you think women are chattel, peasants were also nothing. All right? So if you were a woman peasant, then you were like really down there, right? So peasants were being run off the land because as the population grew, and it grew rapidly, as it grew, they were being squeezed out. So this farming in common, where you had this land and everybody got to kind of divvy it up, and everybody had a piece, and everybody could subsist, and they could take care of themselves. Now that was going away. Well, then what do you do? Taylor, what did they do?
Can you repeat the question?
When they were being run off the land and their farms, where were they going? What were they doing?
I'm not sure.
Okay. Anybody want to take a guess? They did go to colonies, but that was a little bit later, and there was only a select few, right? But they moved to the city, right? There was this mass exodus to the city. What do you see people in rural Alaska doing today?
Going to Anchorage.
Moving to the city.
Moving to the city.
Exactly. Exactly. And it's not because the population is so dense. It's because there are fewer abilities to work and live in the manner that people wish to live right now. All right? So, in Europe, there was also a strong nuclear family, not so much an extended family. Okay? So, you have Europe with the nuclear, you have Africa and the Americas with the extended. Very different. Very different focus. Right? So, the little ice age came in. You had the population like almost doubling. You had unemployment. You had these poorhouses. I was just reading last night about some of the Irish famine victims, and they just found a new graveyard that everybody had forgotten about in the parking lot of what is now a mall, and there were thousands of people in this mass grave because they were in a poorhouse in Ireland, so there were children, there were men and women. Just really, it was a really powerful story, you know, because you can see the effects of this very thing. All right. So, also in Europe, your wealth and your gender and your birthright, which families you were born into, created who you were and the opportunities you had. All right. There was no American dream, that we call it, of moving up. All right. You could not get to the aristocracy at this time. Even if you were richer than the king, you still were not at the same level. All right.
Isn't it like the caste system that's like still around today in India? Because if your mother was a prostitute when you're born, that's what you're going to be, and you can't move up and become anything different.
Well, it wasn't quite that strict, because you could have people who went to debtor's prison. Your children could maybe move up from a footman in a household to potentially the butler, which was at the very top of the household. Okay, so there was a little bit of movement within, say, a household. But if you didn't have a place to live, then you were considered the worst form of humanity, and you were run out of town. They were very suspicious about people who didn't have a home. Okay, but all these people were being run off the land, right?
People are still suspicious about homeless.
Yes, you're right. Good point. Okay, so here's an example of one of the Vatican paintings. And this is in one of the rotundas of the Vatican. And, it's not easily seen. There's so much going on in all of these paintings. But Michelangelo painted a lot of the things in the Vatican. All right, here's the Sistine Chapel fresco, where Michelangelo and the creation of Adam. And I stood underneath this fresco, and I took pictures, and we lost like every picture that we had taken for 4 weeks out of a 6-week trip, which I almost died and cried over. But it's pretty powerful to be in the Sistine Chapel and to see this and to know kind of the story behind Michelangelo as he was painting, because he was painting upside down. It was just amazing. So I highly recommend, if you're able to go to Florence, we didn't make it to Florence, but if you're able to go to Rome, go to the Vatican, because the art in the Vatican is stunning. You need a few days. It's kind of like the Smithsonian, going to the Smithsonian's. All right, any questions?
No.
Okay, Amanda, any questions from you?
I'm gonna think.
Okay. Oh, we have 22 and we're halfway through. We're not even halfway through. So, you can see why we get behind sometimes? Because I kind of like to talk. And ask questions? I'll just blame you. It's all the questions that I ask, right? Okay. As long as we're straight about that. Religious upheavals. You've got the Catholics, the Eastern Orthodox Christians, the Jews, the Muslims, the Anabaptists, the Calvinists, the Anglicans, and the Lutherans. Okay. Calvinists followed Calvin, thank you, and the Lutherans followed Luther, right? And the Catholics followed the Pope, right? Okay, so you have these varying differences now. You have the Catholic Church some of the leaders of the Catholic Church, as with most humanity, were asking for indulgences, and indulgences were basically, they were saying, if you pay me, I'm going to help you get into heaven faster, or help your relative to get into heaven faster, okay, out of purgatory. So people were paying it, and Martin Luther said, that's not right. That's not about God. That's not what we think. And so he broke off, and he said, you know what? We're going to do something different. Calvin broke off, okay? So there was this major religious upheaval in Europe. There was also a counter-revolution, okay? It was called the Protestant Revolution. There was also a counter-revolution within the Catholic Church itself, saying, you know what? They're right, and we need to change some things, because people in this church some of the people in this church have been doing things really wrong. And so there were all these things. Now, how important, Emmanuel, how important was religion in Europe?
It was on the same level as the king.
Yes, it was.
Maybe higher.
Yes, exactly. Okay, so you had mainly Christians in Europe in 1400, but there were Muslims and there were Jews of significant numbers. And you see over in Poland significant numbers of Jews because the King of Poland invited them in. Okay? In Warsaw, you'll see various pockets of Jews in a lot of these different cities. You had the Crusades from 1096 to 1270. All right? And this is where the Christians were going to the Holy Land to win back the area that the Muslims had conquered. Okay? So the Moors had come in and fought, and then the Christians went in and fought, and so it was something that people just were fighting over, and it was a religious fight, right? Okay, so what else can I tell you about that? The Catholic Church was really the dominant power until Martin Luther broke away, and he broke away in 1517. He was a German monk. He believed in salvation as being reborn in the faith. Okay, and these are significant ideas to understand. So Luther believed in rebirth. Okay, Calvin believed in what? Amanda, do you know?
No.
Okay. Anyone? Brianna. Yes, predestination. And what does that mean? Yes. Yes. A certain number of people are going to get into heaven, no matter what you do. Okay? And that's displaying or demonstrating God's grace. Okay. So, some very different ideas, which splinters and moves, and you can see on this map how you have different pockets of people all over. In Turkey, what is now Turkey, you have Muslim, you have the Lutherans up into Scandinavia and the coastal areas, and in Saxony, which is now where Germany is. But you have Roman Catholics still, especially in Spain, Ireland, Italy. And then you see these smatterings of Anglicans, Lutherans, Calvinists. You know, in Switzerland, a lot of Calvinists. And then you have the smattering of Jews too. So as you look at that map and you go, think about this. So if you were all one religion and now other people are coming in and they have a different religion, do religions always get along? How about you and Valdez?
No.
Okay, why not?
Not at all.
Why not? Any reasoning behind that?
Because each side really believes their own religion, and then when somebody else comes in and tells them that their religion is wrong, that's when there's a big fight about it.
Okay. All right. Breaking each other's rules. What did you say? I heard pagans?
Opinions.
Oh, opinions. Thank you. Sorry.
People are stubborn.
People are stubborn. Well, people aren't stubborn. People are normally passionate about religion, and religion is one of those things that's integral to many people's lives. And so when you attack or question someone, that's something so important to you, oftentimes you're met with resistance, right? And you can question things in a nice manner, but you can also question things in a manner where you're automatically going to get a back up and leave me alone response. Is that correct? Right? Right. Human nature. Okay? And so, when they had the counter-revolution to try to address some of the problems, Teresa of Avila, who was Spanish, and Ignatius Loyola, who was the head of the Jesuits, they were two of the people who helped found the counter-revolution. Okay? And then the Reformation in England, was that about religion? Yes, Savannah?
Wasn't it right around that time when the English Bill of Rights came out where they overthrew the current king who was trying to revive Catholicism?
It comes. It comes. Okay? The Reformation in England was all about King Henry VIII. Anybody know King Henry VIII? He was the one with all the wives.
Yes.
Amy, what did you say? Yes. Yes, he had many, many wives, right? Well, the Catholic Church didn't do what the King of England wanted to do. King of England said, I'm going to do what I want. So he created his own religion. Yes, Valdez?
Took the words out of our mouths.
Okay. All right. So he had 6 marriages. He ruled from 1509 to 1547, and he was looking for an heir. Not just an heir, he was looking for a male heir. Because in Europe, male heirs were what you needed. Right? You didn't want a woman heir. Okay? We had Queen Elizabeth, didn't we? That's a change, isn't it? Okay? But she was pretty tough. To be in that role as queen, you had to be really tough. Okay? But he started, King Henry VIII, started the Church of England, which is Anglican. So you have the Catholic Church who says, wait a minute, we have all these churches, and they've been getting wealthy, right, these churches. And some of it was because of indulgences, but a lot of it was because they were supported by, the church was normally supported by the aristocracy. Like the lord of the area would build a chapel on his grounds, and the peasants who were on his feudal grounds would come to that church. Okay? But they would tithe to the church. They would give money to the church, right? And they would use it sometimes to show the status, okay? If I give this much money to the church, look how good I am as a lord, right? I mean, it's conspicuous consumption to some degree, right? It's in your face, I have this, okay? Regardless of how it got there, there are many churches that have a lot of gold inlaid in them. They have beautiful stained glass. Some of them are incredibly beautiful. Some of them are very plain and simple. Okay, they really vary. But in Europe, in general, the older the church, the fancier it is. Okay, and so the King of England said, and by the way, when I create my religion, I'm taking all of your churches with me. So that didn't make the Pope very happy, right? It didn't make any of the Catholics who were living there happy either, did it? And so there was a huge pushback between the two of them. And so the Pope was saying, hey, you can't do that. And the King of England said, well, too bad, I just did. I don't really care. He also beheaded his wife, so he didn't probably really care about a lot of things except for himself. Right? Would you agree? Okay. The significant, the significant thing about England is that it went back and forth between being under Anglican control and then the Catholics trying to gain control again with Prince James of Scotland, right? For 1,000 years they fought. And when I mean they fought, it was bloody. It was just bloody massacres and, kind of like the Crusades, right? Really, really bloody. So, Elizabeth I, who was very austere, she solidified the Church of England, all right? Which meant that everybody in England was part of the Church of England. You were Anglican. And if you weren't Anglican, you weren't okay. You may or may not be able to live here. You definitely probably won't be able to give any money to the Catholic Church. You need to give it to the Anglican Church. Okay? And I have to say, when King Henry changed all these churches and took them over, that didn't mean that people still didn't pay. It just meant that they paid somebody else. Right? All right. So the Calvinists, when you look at Calvin and the Calvinists, the militant Calvinists were called what? Amanda, any idea? Wait, you don't have a book yet, do you, Amanda?
Puritans? I don't.
It is the Puritans, yes. I keep calling on you. Do you have your book yet?
I'm supposed to get it today.
Okay. Sorry. Okay. The Puritans. Who were the Puritans? They were militant Calvinists. Besides that.
All right,
Thank you. Yes. Exactly. They were the Plymouth Colony. They became the Plymouth Colony. It wasn't all Puritans who came over on the Mayflower, but the powerful councilmen were Puritans, and everybody had to sign the Mayflower contract, no matter if you were Puritan or not. Right? So the Puritans were occasionally liked and occasionally not liked in England. Okay? Now Elizabeth really didn't like the Puritans until the Catholic Pope had suggested to some of the Catholic aristocracy to overthrow the queen, and she's like, oh, well, okay, I guess the Puritans are better than the Catholics at this time, right? But it would go back and forth like that in almost every country, depending on who was in control and who benefited from what, right? It's nothing new, but the Puritans were run over to Denmark. Many of them left because they couldn't create the church that they wanted. The Anglican Church was not as pure as they wanted, and so they left, and they went to Denmark. Well, then they got a colony, they got a charter to move, and they left because they didn't want to become Danes. They wanted to stay English. All right? So the Puritans appealed not to the nobility, and they did not appeal to the lower class. They appealed to the middle class. And the middle class was this new class that was emerging because of the market society and the merchants and the ability for some to work on a ship and maybe make enough money to change their life a little bit. Like I said, you can never reach lordship at this time. In a few years, you can if you couple hundred years, you were able to. You could not necessarily buy yourself into the aristocracy, but you could occasionally be appointed to the aristocracy. But generally, it was someone who had done a lot for the queen or king. They were either a well-versed knight, like in the Crusades. Occasionally, they would become landowners. Most of the people who fought in the Crusades were not landowning people. And so we get down to the resource of land. Now we're starting to talk about land again. So is this about land or is this about religion? The Puritans and Plymouth Rock. It's both. Exactly. Because they don't own any land, do they? They've been run out. We've seen how they're running out. Been run out. Okay? They're not able to buy land because the lords aren't going to give up their land. The only reason that someone gets land from a king or queen is they take it from someone else. Okay? So the king or queen, like if this lord fought against the queen on this occasion, she would grant their holdings or parcel out their holdings to the people who did fight for her. Kind of like what? And there you go. Okay, any questions? Okay, so the Calvinists were all about self-discipline, right? And again, they appealed mainly to the middle class. And here's another map of the major religions in Europe in 1560. All right. Okay, so next slide. We'll see if we can get through this before we get cut off. If we don't, we're going to continue on chapter 2 next Thursday. What day is today? Tuesday?
Yeah.
Thank you. It feels like it's already Thursday. I don't know. We're going to finish this and start on chapter 3. Okay? So, Portugal and the Atlantic, 1400 to 1500. Prince Henry the Navigator, okay, the Prince of Portugal, he was the explorer extraordinaire. He was one of the first, right? And he had the money to explore. Think about it. He was the prince. He wanted to explore, but he also had rich merchants who were helping him, right? Okay, so he used the compass and the astrolabe. And these were new pieces of technology that they were, that was changing the face of exploration. All right? And so they were really the first to, Portugal was really the first to capitalize on new maps and this new technology. All right? So the new slavery is all about what happened when Portugal really started engaging in the slavery and the rest followed. All right? So in the 16th century, there was a flourishing intercontinental business supplying Spanish and Portuguese sugar plantations with slaves. Okay? Lots and lots and lots of slaves. Big sugar plantations. All right? So the slaves came from maybe they were debtors, or maybe they came from raids. But then the Portuguese started supplying the slave traders with guns, which changed the face of slavery, didn't it? If you have a gun, you're going to be able to gain more slaves than with not. Okay? Does that make sense? All right. So this new magnitude of the trade, 12 million people were shipped out. Okay? This was the most slave trading since the Roman Empire. And the Romans had a lot of slaves. Right? And so the Muslims had a lot of slaves. but the Muslims only dealt in non-Muslim slaves. The Romans dealt in any kind of slave. And the Portuguese dealt mainly in African slaves. Right? So you see these differences in slavery. The magnitude, however, with these new extremes really started changing the face of slavery and dehumanizing people because they weren't nearly as important anymore. All right? Does that make sense? Any questions or comments in Valdez? I didn't hear you. That must be okay.
Be nodding our heads now.
Oh, okay. You're so small on the screen. I'm going to try to change it so I can see you better. Amanda, any questions or comments?
I'm good.
Okay, call me right after class, 3673. Okay? All right, Star, any questions, comments, if you can? All right. All right. 2 here?
So just like a basic overview of like new slavery, they went from lower household people to just be there, do this, wouldn't care about you. It's like the basic step they went from. So like servant to slave, kind of.
Servant to hard laborer. Think prison laborer, where you had no control over anything at all, ever. Yes, Savannah.
What exactly was slavery before the new slavery?
I'm sorry. Say,
What exactly were the demographics of slavery before the new slavery?
there was slavery, and there was a flourishing trade of slavery in Africa, but you could get out of slavery. You were only indebted for maybe 7 years. All right. So new slavery was for life, and not just you; it was any of your children.
What about European slavery?
Well, the Europeans didn't have a lot of slaves, but the slaves that they had were the same, where they would have a limited amount of time as a slave.
And were they mainly imported from Africa, or were they from the local area?
They were from all over because Britain was starting into the. This was actually before Britain started into the trade. They started importing slaves from all over their colonies. Okay, so you had Indian slaves, you had Burmese, but they had mainly Muslim and African Moors. They had Moors for slaves at that time. Okay. All right. Well, we'll finish this chapter next week.